Exodus chapter 7. The last lesson, last week, we ended, and you remember Pharaoh uh, was pretty unimpressed by Moses and Moses' threats that Moses fired at him, and he would not move. He hardened his heart and said no to the release. But God had called Moses, and Moses would not stop, even though it looked like things weren't going well and it looked like failure. Moses was determined to do what God called him to do. And as I ended last week, I said this, that Moses may have been a reluctant hero. He was slow to want to go. But once he began the task that God called him to, he was determined to continue that task, and he refused to back away. He was going to finish what he started. We talked about the fact that the path of obedience is surrounded by opposing powers. Anytime we say yes to God, and when God calls us to do something and we say yes to him, there's going to be opposition to that. And Moses found that opposition. But what Moses found, and we'll see even more today, was that no matter how great the opposing power is, the power of God that calls us is greater still. And we will see that become very clear as we kind of work through the text today. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the plagues, their power, their purpose, and we're really going to see a battle that goes on, a conflict between heaven and God's throne and earth and the very inferior realm of Satan. And we'll see that conflict raging pretty clearly. And we're going to ultimately see the sovereignty of God over it all. Now, I know Daniel has nothing to do with Exodus, but there is, I think, a parallel story that happens with Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and Pharaoh. Both of these men are very arrogant. They think they're running the show. They think they're in charge. And I would simply say that human leadership at any level, whether it's political or church or company or whatever, needs to be very careful when we begin to think we're the ultimate authority. And we have two political leaders, Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel and Pharaoh in Exodus, that really thought they were sovereign. They did not submit themselves, no matter no matter how great you are, no matter how skilled you are, no matter how much power you have assembled around you. It is never equal to the power and the sovereignty of God. And Nebuchadnezzar found that out. I want to just read you a couple of scriptures. Nebuchadnezzar, of course, was the one that um, invaded Judah and in 586 BC took captives, Jewish captives like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and like Daniel, and thousands of others. He's the one that built the golden image and said, you have to bow down and worship my image or you'll be thrown into the fiery furnace. Daniel spoke to him one day, and he spoke this prophetic word, and I put it in your notes. This is what's going to happen to you, Nebuchadnezzar. They will drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. God said to Nebuchadnezzar, I'm going to have to teach you a lesson. You're going to spend 7 years out in the fields like an animal so that you will know who gives you the power you have. That's not you, it's the sovereign one. Nebuchadnezzar reacted to that. The king spoke, saying, is this not the great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? And while the word was still in the king's mouth, a voice fell from heaven. King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom has departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass like oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Verse 33, which is not in your notes, says that very hour the word was fulfilled. That very hour, he went into the field and started in really insanity for the next 7 years. So he would recognize Nebuchadnezzar, um, you have power that I gave to you. When I read scriptures like that, and my mom is here today, I am glad that she always reminded me not to get too big for my britches, right? I mean, Nebuchadnezzar got too big for his, and so will Pharaoh. And that's really the reason I even share that story. So we're going to see Pharaoh getting brought down a notch. He thinks he's in charge. He's not. But Moses is going to remain calm. He's not impulsive. He's not reluctant. He doesn't display this attitude of, I got you, triumphalism. He just exerts steady and calm leadership. So let's go to chapter 7 and verse 14. So the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. He refuses to let the people go. And I apologize. I am going to be um, catching my runny nose all day long. Okay. So just bear with me. I apologize. Um, Nothing worse than bringing attention to that and then standing here and doing it. My mom gave me no advice about that. So obviously she should have. All right. Um, Go to Pharaoh in the morning when he goes out to the water, and you shall stand by the river's bank to meet him, and the rod which was turned to a serpent you shall take in your hand. Let's stop there. A couple of things, verse 14 and 15. Pharaoh's heart hard. That's going to be a theme that we're going to see a lot of. And this is a question people have. How is that fair? And I may not satisfy the answer, that there may not satisfy your desire to know an answer, but today and even some next week, and there'll be other weeks we'll talk about it more. Hopefully, you'll get some satisfaction in what is going on here. Um, Look at verse 14 one more time. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hard. The verb for the word that is there is kaved, and it means heavy or weighted down. It appears 7 times in chapters 7 through 14, and it always means heavy. It's the same word that is used with ears in Isaiah 6 when God says their ears have become dull, they've become heavy. So keep that in mind as we go. So his heart has become kaved, it's become heavy. By the way, kabod is the word for glory. It's the heaviness of God. So there's connection there. But his heart, God just makes a statement. His heart has become heavy. We'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. So he said, I want you to go down to the river. Pharaoh went down to the river. This is where Moses is going to meet him. We don't know why he went to the river. It could have been to bathe. We know that his daughter did that when she found Moses. Remember that? And it could have been to check the level of the Nile River. The Nile was a god to them. So he could have been performing some kind of ritual worship there. He could have just been taking a walk. We don't know. Text doesn't say, but it is there that God tells Moses to meet Pharaoh. Verse 16, and you shall say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews has sent me to you, saying, let my people go that they may serve me in the wilderness. But indeed, until now, you would not hear. Thus saith the Lord, by this you shall know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will strike the waters which are in the river with the rod that is in my hand, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that are in the river shall die, the river shall stink, and the Egyptians will loathe to drink the water of the river. So he has a message for Pharaoh. He goes down to the river to meet Pharaoh. He has a message. He will have one later for Aaron. But he says to Pharaoh, God is going to bring judgment, and he's going to bring judgment right here at the Nile River. The Nile River was not only in their minds a deity of some form, but it was the source of life for the Egyptians. I mean, you know how waterways are a source of, still today, nations that are landlocked. We were in Burkina Faso and it's landlocked, and there's no waterway near it. Just below it is the country of Ghana, which borders the ocean, and it has a thriving economy. Now, it's not the only reason. There's corruption, but water is important. Waterways are important to commerce and important to prosperity. And so God's judgment is going to go right at the heart of the Egyptian economy. Um, the Nile also had its own patron god that that Yahweh was going to defang. He was going to say, "Here's who the real God is." And so it's a big deal. The message to Pharaoh is, "I'm going to strike you at the very place that you have confidence." This is a river that has a patron god, and this is a river that is the source of Egypt's economy and commerce and life. And I'm going to strike you right there. And notice the reason, so that you may know that I am God over all the earth. Pharaoh, you have gotten too big for your britches. You think that you are in control, and I'm going to go right to the heart of the matter, and I'm going to show you who the real God is. So, verse 19, Lord spoke to Moses, and now here's the message that he said to deliver to Aaron. Say to Aaron, so he's already told Pharaoh what's going to happen. Now say to Aaron, take your rod and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their streams, over their rivers, over their ponds, over their pools of water, that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in buckets of wood and pitchers of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so just as the Lord commanded. So he lifted up the rod and he struck the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. The fish that were in the river died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink the water of the river. So there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. So the message to Aaron is, go and strike the Nile. Remember, Moses struck the Egyptian, all right? Same Hebrew word. He will later strike the rock, and God will strike the firstborn. So this is a word that shows up in the Hebrew oftentimes in this narrative. It says that all the waters turned to blood. So the natural question is, how could the Egyptians do the same thing he did if all the waters had already turned to blood? And so, what is the answer to that question? All may not mean 100%. It may be most of the waters. It could have been that only the surface water, not the subterranean water that would be found through digging, was affected. It could have meant that it only lasted for a moment and then returned to water long enough to kill all the fish and then return to water. The text doesn't say, but we do know that the magicians will follow and they will be able to do the same thing. We read that in verse 22. Yes. Why would the Egyptians want to do that? Well, I think it's safe to say that leaders, when their egos are challenged, don't really care what's best for the people they serve. They just want to win the game. And I think that's probably what's going on here. And so that'd be my best guess. I just think he struck it. I'll show you, and it becomes a alpha male kind of thing going on here. So um, he'd have bottled water, so he didn't worry about it, I guess. So in verse 22, the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and Pharaoh's heart grew hard and did not heed them as the Lord had said. So the magicians are able to duplicate again. What they duplicated is a little hard to figure unless all didn't mean all, or it met most, or there was subterranean water, like I said, or it was quick and came back. But we're not given all the details, but we do know that the magicians were able to replicate in some manner what Aaron was able to do. He was not moved, his heart becomes harder, and Pharaoh turns and goes into his house. Neither was his heart moved by this, verse 23 and verse 24. So all the Egyptians dug all around the river for water to drink because they could not drink the water of the river. So apparently, what the Egyptians did was not reversed, if what Aaron did was, and 7 days passed after the Lord had struck the river. Let me, without thinking about it a lot, that's always dangerous, but let me, without thinking about it a lot, maybe go on record and say that, because we'll see it with the frogs, that what Aaron did lasted short enough time, or lasted long enough to kill the fish, but then maybe was reversed. The reason I say that is, if you remember the signs that God gave him to do, throw the rod on the ground, it becomes a serpent, pick it back up and it becomes a rod, put your hand in your breast and it becomes leprous, put it back in. Now, again, this is some speculation, but it seems to me that maybe the way that God was doing this was, I'll turn it all to blood, the fish die, and now I turn it back to water. And then the Egyptians say, we'll do that, we'll match it. And the Egyptians were unable to turn it back. That is a possibility, because then they're having to dig around for water to find water. So I think that's speculative at best. I think that's a possibility. I don't know if you heard that. She said, could it be like retribution for God saying you threw all the babies in the Nile? Now I'm going to take the Nile. I think that's a real possibility. The interesting thing is, this is a whole nother subject, but sometimes liberal scholars find things like that and then they use that to doubt the reality of it and say it's just this narrative story that, kind of plays out. But um, I think that's a real possibility. We see it with the firstborn. I mean, he says that about the firstborn. Israel is my firstborn. You touch them, and I'm going to touch your firstborn. So I think if you remember at the end of one of the studies, I talked about the law of lex talionis, which is an eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth. So it very well could be. That's a good point. So if we put all that together, again, with a lot of speculation, it could have been that Aaron did it, fish died, it came back. The magician said, we can do that too. And they did it, and it didn't come back for 7 days. So that would be maybe the best way to package that. All right. Any other thoughts or questions? One down, and we're only covering 9 today, so 8 to go. All right. Frogs. How many love frogs? All right. Um, the Lord spoke to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will smite all your territory with frogs. If you refuse, I will. And the word is smite. It anticipates a far more serious smiting that will come later with the firstborn. Here's the promise of the frogs in verse 3 and 4. The river shall bring forth frogs abundantly, which shall go up and come into your house. How many love them enough for them to be in your bedrooms and on your bed and in the houses of your servants and on your people, into your ovens? How about that? Bake brownies and out pops Kermits, all right? And on into your kneading bowls, and the frogs shall come up on you and your people and all your servants. Interestingly, the word that frogs abundantly, the Hebrew word is saras, same word that's used in Exodus 1:7, when Pharaoh looked out and saw that the Hebrews were growing exceedingly and saras, abundantly. They were proliferating, and now maybe this was retribution as well. I don't know. I'll show you. We're going to proliferate and expand abundantly, saras, the frogs. So, verse 5, the Lord spoke to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your rod over the streams, over the rivers, over the ponds, and caused frogs to come out in the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt. Frogs came up, covered the land of Egypt. And verse 7, and the magicians did so with their enchantments, and brought up frogs on the land of Egypt as well. And then, so they can bloody the waters, but they can't remove it. They can bring frogs, but they can't eliminate it. And Hamilton says God's work can be imitated but never equaled. So that's an important little statement here. Pharaoh, then in verse 8, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, entreat the Lord that he may take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go that they may sacrifice to the Lord. So Pharaoh relents. Moses asked him a question, verse 9. Moses said to Pharaoh, accept the honor of saying, when shall I intercede for you, for your servants, for your people, to destroy the frogs from you and your houses, that they may remain in the river only? So Moses says, when would you like me to ask God to get rid of the frogs? This is a nice little conversation they're having in the palace. So, okay, when would you like to get rid of the frogs? And Pharaoh said, tomorrow. What in the world? He said, tomorrow. And he said, let it be according to your word, that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. All right. I heard a sermon years ago. I was pastoring in Morocco, and one of my parishioners brought me sermon of their favorite pastor that clearly wasn't me. So they brought me a tape of somebody else. Um, uh, Here's my favorite pastor. They brought that to me and said, so, but the sermon was titled One More Night with the Frogs. And it was unpacking this absurd response of Pharaoh. He could have said, get rid of them now, but he said get rid of them tomorrow. Now, people have also suggested that that could mean uh, the the obvious is it means one more day. That's what it sounds like. And again, we would say, why in the world would you want them one more day? But of course, this pastor was making a point, and it's we do that with sin. He said, one more time. Let me do this one more time. Let me respond this way one more time. That kind of compromise. And maybe that's it. Others have suggested it could mean that he was saying by morning or as soon as possible. I mean, that could have been, again, we struggle with English translation of Hebrew. So it could have been get rid of them if tomorrow, get rid of them as soon as possible. But again, God says, I will, or Moses said, I will honor that request so that you can see that there is none like God. You're because your magicians can't get rid of them. They can bring them up, but they couldn't get rid of them. And this will prove to you that there is none like God. So in verse 12, Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh. Moses cried out to the Lord concerning the frogs, which he brought against Pharaoh. So the Lord did according to the word of Moses, and the frogs died out of the houses, out of the courtyards, and out of the fields. They gathered them together. Please notice these frogs did not all go run and jump back in the river. Okay. They died in the oven with the brownies. And so they had to clean them up. I want to make sure you get the picture. All right. And so they piled them up in heaps and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land, of course, stank. And but when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and did not heed them as the Lord had said. God answers the prayer, but Pharaoh recants his promise. Any thoughts there? Second plague. Anybody want to weigh in on the frogs? Yes, John. There's a lot of frog legs. You're right. Thank you, John. I wish I hadn't asked for questions, but all right. Verse number 16. This might be the one that grosses me out the most. The Lord said to Moses, say to Aaron, stretch out your rod and strike the dust of land so that it may become lice throughout all the land of Egypt. And they did so, for Aaron stretched out his hand with his rod and struck the dust of the earth, and it became lice on man and beast. All the dust of land became lice throughout all the land of Egypt. Now the magicians so worked with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lights on man and beast, and the magician said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart grew hard, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had said. So the lice come. The Egyptian magicians cannot reproduce the miracle, and they recognize this is the finger of God. And by the way, it's the only other use of the finger of God is when God will write the tablets in Exodus. So just don't know if that means anything, but it's interesting. They said this is something we can't reproduce. This is clearly the finger of God. Verse 20. We'll move on. See how far I want to read here. I'll just go ahead and read the whole plague. The Lord said to Moses, "Rise early in the morning, stand before Pharaoh as he comes out to the water, and then say to him, 'Thus saith the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you and your servants, on your people, and into your houses. Houses of the Egyptians shall be full of swarms of flies, and also the ground on which they stand. And in that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, in which my people dwell, that no swarms of flies shall be there, in order that you may know." Notice how many times this comes up: "In order that you may know that I am the Lord." This is what I was talking about at the beginning. This is the issue with Pharaoh. He thinks he's in charge, just like Nebuchadnezzar thought he was in charge. And we sometimes think we're in charge. And sometimes God has to remind us we're not in charge. And that's what is happening here. "I will make a difference between my people and your people. Tomorrow the sign shall be." And the Lord did so. Thick swarms of flies came in the house of Pharaoh, into his servants' houses, into all the land of Egypt. The land was corrupted because of the swarms of flies. Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron and said, "Go sacrifice to your God in the land." Let me just pause there for just a moment. Let me work through part of this before we read the rest. So this plague is like the previous three, but few exceptions. There's no magicians. They don't even try. All right. Couldn't replicate the lice. So the magicians are not involved here. Aaron doesn't seem to be present in this one. I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying he doesn't seem to be present. And this is the first time that Israel or the Hebrews are isolated from this. He says, I'm going to protect Goshen, and the flies will not get into that land. That's the first time that we are told that in the text. Hamilton says this discrimination moves the events from beyond a natural cataclysm into a precise divine intervention. In other words, God is saying, we're going to ramp this up a little bit. Now I'm going to show you how precise I can be with my judgment. It's not going to touch the Hebrews who are just on the other side of the border. All right. So this is a real clear upping of the ante, if you will. Now, I will say, I think this is an important pastoral comment. It doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes we are, as Christians, um, we are the benefactors or the beneficiaries of judgment that we maybe do not, I don't want to say deserve, because we all deserve to be judged, but because of the righteousness of Jesus. My point is, we are not always spared from when God brings divine judgment on a people, on a nation. We aren't always spared. Now, this is a time they were, but we are not always. I think we can all recognize that our nation, which many years ago started going in a really bad direction, and we have paid the price to some degree for that, even though we may have tried to stand for values that we felt were godly and virtuous. Sometimes those that are innocent still receive the impact of the judgment. This is a case where they did not. That's the whole point. But we can't, this is not a place that preachers can preach and say, see, if you just do the right thing, God may judge your nation and you may not feel it at all. I wish I could preach that, but I don't know that I can promise that in scripture. because that is not a scriptural promise. He did it here, but he didn't do it the times prior. Does that make sense to everybody? I just think that's an important takeaway. So there's no blanket promise for God's people in this light. So Pharaoh makes a partial concession. Now we want to go back to verse 25. So Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron, and he said, go sacrifice, go ahead, go sacrifice to your God in the land. And Moses said, it's not right to do so, for we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians to the Lord our God. If we sacrifice the abomination of the Egyptians before their eyes, then will they not stone us? We will go 3 days journey into the wilderness and sacrifice the Lord our God as he will command us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go that you may sacrifice the Lord your God in the wilderness, but only you shall not go very far. Intercede for me. And Moses said, indeed, I am going out from you, and I will entreat the Lord that the swarms of flies may depart tomorrow from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. But let Pharaoh not deal deceitfully anymore in not letting the people go to sacrifice the Lord. So Moses went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord, and the Lord did according to the word of Moses. He removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, from his people. Not one remained. But again, Pharaoh hardens his heart at this time also. Neither would he let the people go. So let's kind of walk through what just happened. Pharaoh makes a partial concession for the movement of God's people, only a partial concession. And again, there's a point here, just a pastoral point. We cannot compromise with the enemy. We don't make partial concessions with our enemy. God tells Moses to tell Pharaoh to release the people to worship, but Pharaoh changes it, first of all, to sacrifice. And then Moses said, we can't do that in front of the Egyptians because we would be sacrificing the abomination of the Egyptians, and then they would stone us for doing. Now that raises another question. What does that even mean? What is the abomination of the Egyptians? There's a couple of thoughts here. You remember when, and there's a lot of speculation on this, but remember when Jacob brought his family to Egypt in the first place, and they were giving Goshen, and Joseph instructs them on what to say. Say, we are shepherds. And there is some sense that Egyptians looked very much down on shepherds, down on sheep. Sheep were detestable to them. They wanted nothing to do, although they had flocks, but they had servants taking care of them. And so there is some sense here that that maybe that's the issue. We wouldn't want to engage in the sacrifice of sheep in the eyes of the Egyptians. That is detestable to them. They would stone us. Um, some just suggested that the whole idea of sacrifice would have been so detestable to the Egyptians that they would need to be removed from that. We're not exactly sure, but we know that what Pharaoh offered was a compromise plan, and ultimately, when the flies are gone, his heart hardens again. So that plan never even plays out. All right. So again, his heart gets harder, and the flies don't do it either. Okay. Any comments? There's lots of easy stopping points here with plagues. So anybody, any questions? All right, we will move on then. We're at number 5, chapter 9. The Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh and tell him, thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, behold, the hand of the Lord will be on your cattle in the field, on the horses, on the donkeys, on the camels, on the oxen, on the sheep, a very severe pestilence. And the Lord will make, again, notice the distinction, the Lord will make a difference between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt. So nothing shall die of all that belongs to the children of Israel. Then the Lord appointed a time, saying, tomorrow the Lord will do this thing in the land. So the Lord did this thing on the next day, and all the livestock of Egypt died. But of the livestock of the children of Israel, not one died. And Pharaoh sent, and indeed, not even one of the livestock of Israel was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh became hard, and he did not let the people go. So again, with the pestilence, there is a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Um, all cannot be all here. Um, it could mean most, but it can't be all, because there's going to be boils that are going to come as well in the next plague. But there is a distinction that is made. Boils in verse number 8. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, take for yourself handfuls of ashes from a furnace, and let Moses scatter it toward the heavens in the sight of Pharaoh, and it will become fine dust in all the land of Egypt, and it will cause boils that break out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. They took ashes from the furnace, and they stood before Pharaoh, and Moses scattered them toward heaven, and they caused boils that break out in sores on man and beast. And the magicians, who are not trying to replicate anything anymore, the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boils were on the magicians and on all the Egyptians. Lord hardened, notice this, the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not heed them, just as the Lord had spoken to Moses. So boils are now on beasts and on humans. The magicians could not stand because of the boils. Now, let me talk about hardening the heart here. Okay, this is the first reference to the Lord. Just hear me out. To the Lord hardening his heart. Now, he promised in 421, God promised he would harden his heart. Okay, so if you think, oh, wait a minute, he did promise that, he did. And actually, look at 421. Let's just look at it together. 421. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do all the wonders before Pharaoh, which I put in your hand, but I will harden his heart. Okay, so God promised that. Look at chapter 7 and look at verse 3. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart. Now that's a promise that God made. I am going to harden his heart. But this is the first time that, before, was just a promise. I could say, I'm going to give you $100, and I could say that 20 times, but that's just me saying it. And then if I give you $20 or $100, I just lowered it to 20. Realize there's a lot of you. So when I actually do it, it's a different story. And the pastor gave me $100. So the difference here is God has promised that he will harden his heart, but until now, it has not said that he hardened his heart. This is important. He had many opportunities for his heart to be softened. Among those, chapter 8, verse 8, 19, 28, 9, 27, 28, 10, 17. Finally, his heart is hardened by the pressure that God has applied. Again, you've heard me, or you've seen me use this illustration. We have this parking lot in the middle of August, and the sun is shining down on the parking lot, and you put a piece of clay on the parking lot, and you put a piece of wax, and the clay gets harder with the pressure of the sun, and the wax melts. It's the pressure of the sun, but it's the character or the nature of the substance in response to the pressure of the sun. Now, I say that as a non-reformed Arminian that does not believe that God just says, sorry about your luck, Terry, but I have predestined you to go to hell and you can't do anything about it. I don't believe that that's what God does. I believe God applies pressure and we respond to that pressure in a specific way. This fits what's happened here. He's had chance, his heart hardened, his heart hardened, his heart hardened. And finally, the Lord hardened his heart. I think that's different, and I think it's different for a reason. We will add to that a little bit more, if not this week, next week. Okay. Verse 13. We are now chapter 9 and verse 13. The Lord said to Moses, rise early in the morning, stand before Pharaoh, and say to him, thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For at that time I will send all my plagues. I will send my plagues to your very heart and on your servants and on your people, that you may know again that there is none like me on all the earth. Now, if I had stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, then you would have been cut off from the earth. But indeed, for this purpose, I have raised you up, that I may show my power in you, and that my name may be declared in all the earth. As yet you exalt yourself against my people, and that you will not let them go. Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause very heavy hail to rain down, such as has not been in Egypt since its founding until now. Therefore, send now and gather your livestock and all that you have in the field, for the hail shall come down on every man and every animal which is found in the field and is not brought home, and they shall die. This is a really interesting conversation as well. The Lord tells Moses to go and speak to Pharaoh again. Look at verse 15. Let me read the first line of verse 15 to you. If I had stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, then you would have been cut off from the earth. There are some Hebrew, or there's some translations of the Hebrew that could be more like I should have, or in under normal circumstances, I would have just wiped you out, but I had another purpose. And that kind of fits the context. It's almost as if God is saying, Pharaoh, I could have finished you off a long time ago. Under normal circumstances, I would have, but I have a purpose for you. Now, that purpose here is to raise you up, and your arrogance, claiming that you are the greatest on the earth, to show who the greatest really is. Now, again, go back to that predestination thing, and we've been through this many times. I do not believe that foreknowledge, just because God knows it, means that God forced it to happen. I think God gives choices that he knows are going to happen. So that that's a circular argument after a while. But what he is saying is to Pharaoh, I am going to raise you up and I'm going to make you an object lesson at this point. You have rejected me. I'm now going to make you an object lesson so that you know who the greatest really is. You think you are, and I am going to show the world I have plans for you, Pharaoh, and I'm going to use your arrogance against me to make a point to the world. Look at verse 20. He who feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his livestock flee to the houses. But he who did not regard the word of the Lord left his servants and his livestock in the field. So not everybody feared, and those who did not fear obviously paid the price. Their livestock died. Verse 22, then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, on man, on beast, on every herb of the field, throughout the land of Egypt. And Moses stretched out his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail and fire darted to the ground, and the Lord rained hail on the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, so very heavy that there was none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. And the hail struck throughout the whole land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast. And the hail struck every herb of the field and broke every tree of the field. Only, again, in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel, was there no hail. So again, the hail comes and only Israel is spared. And Pharaoh, verse 27, sent and called for Moses and Aaron, and he said to them, I've sinned this time. I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and my people and I are wicked. Treat the Lord that there may be no more mighty thundering and hail, for it is enough. I will let you go, and then you shall stay no longer. Verse 30. But as for you and your servants, I know that you will not yet. But as for you and your servants, I know that you will not yet fear the Lord God. Verse 29, I'm sorry. And Moses said to him, as soon as I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands to the Lord. The thunder will cease. There will be no more hail, that you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But as for you and your servants, I know that you will still not fear the Lord your God. So Pharaoh makes this confession again. We have sinned. We're wicked. We're terrible. Please make this hail stop. And Moses says to him, we'll make it stop, but I know this is not going to change you. You've not yet been changed. Greenberg said he acknowledged guilt, but he went on being guilty. Verse 31, now the flax and the barley were struck by the hail, was in the head, were struck, for in the barley was in the head, and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the spelt were not struck, for they are late crops. In verse number 33, the damage has already been done to the crops. So Moses went out of the city from Pharaoh and spread out his hands to the Lord. And the thunder and the hail ceased, and the rain was not poured on the earth. And when Pharaoh saw the rain, the hail, and the thunder had ceased, look at this, he sinned yet more, and he hardened his heart, he and his servants. So the heart of Pharaoh was hard, neither would he let the children of Israel go, as the Lord had spoken by Moses. So Pharaoh's heart even gets harder at this point as he continues to reject God. We then get to chapter 10, and I'll move quickly through the end of these plagues if we can. If we don't finish, we don't finish. But my 6 hours isn't up yet, so I can still go for a little longer. Chapter 10 and verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, go into Pharaoh. I've hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine before him, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your son's son the mighty things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. So God tells Moses that the window, I want you to look at verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, go in to Pharaoh. And this is a really important thing here, for I have hardened his heart. This is the first time, and I know that this is like talking Greek to you, but it's actually talking Hebrew to you. This is the first time that we have different forms in the English language. This is the Hiphil, Hiphil form. It is the first person perfect. And so when God says here, this first time it's used, he is saying, I'm the one responsible. First time, I am the one responsible for the hardening of his heart. This is Hiphil, the first perfect form of the Hebrew kabed. So God is now saying that I have hardened his heart for good. Point of no return. All right. Now, you can argue that if you want. I could argue that. But in the Hebrew, this is the first time it shows up this way. God is saying, first person perfect, I've hardened it. It's hard, it's solid. And God tells Moses that this is not, that what's happened is not for Pharaoh to see, it's not for the Egyptians to see. What's about to happen is for the people of Israel to see, so they can tell their sons and their grandsons and their grandchildren, this is what God has done for us. In verse 3, Moses and Aaron came into Pharaoh, and they said to him, thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else, if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I'm going to bring locusts into your territory. They shall cover the face of the earth, so that no one will be able to see the earth, and they shall eat the residue of what is left, which remains to you from the hail, and they shall eat every tree which grows up for you out of the field. And John, to your point, this place is a mess by now. I mean, when it talks about the damage that's been done by the hail, this place is a mess. They shall fill your houses, the houses of all your servants, the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen since the day that they were on the earth to this day. And he turned and he went out from Pharaoh. And so Moses says, you need to humble yourself or else, but he will not. We know that locusts are seen throughout scripture as a form of divine judgment. That is no different here. Look at verse 7, an interesting verse. Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long are you going to let this man be a snare to us? Let the men go that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not know? Here, John, this is it. Do you not know that Egypt is destroyed? His advisors say, would you look around, sir? This place is a mess, and your ego is killing us. I mean, that's really what they're saying here. Would you just drop it? Verse 8. So Moses and Aaron were brought again to Pharaoh, and he said to them, so he must have listened, go serve the Lord your God. Who are the ones that are going? Um, No, so Moses and Aaron were brought in to Pharaoh, and he said to them, go serve the Lord your God. Who are the ones that are going? And Moses said, we will go with all of our young, all of our old, with our sons, our daughters, with our flocks and our herds. We will go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. And he said to them, the Lord had better be with you when I let you and your little ones go. Beware, for evil is ahead of you. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord, for that is what you desired. And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. So Pharaoh offers a compromise. Kids can't go, wives can't go, and it ends in a stalemate, and they are driven out. And in verse 12, the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, and all the hail has left. All that the hail is left. So Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts, and the locusts went up over all the land of Egypt and rested on their territory, the territory of Egypt, so that they were very severe. Previously, there had been no such locusts as they, nor shall there be any after them. So the plague, well, we'll just keep reading through verse 15. They covered the face of the whole earth, so the land was darkened, and they ate every herb of the land and all the fruit of the trees which the hail left. So there remained nothing green on the trees or on the plants of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. So just an incredibly massive invasion of locusts. And then there's again a temporary relenting, verse 16. Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron in haste and said, I've sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now, therefore, please forgive my sin only this once, and entreat the Lord your God that he may take away from me this death only. So he went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord, and the Lord turned a very strong west wind, which took the locusts away, blew them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the territory of Egypt, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go. And in verse 21, we'll read this and make some final comments. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt. Darkness, look at this, which may even be felt. That's an important line. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Darkness for 3 days that could be felt. That's thick darkness. But it did not touch Israel. There was no warning to Pharaoh on this one. And this was no ordinary darkness. It would be darkness that would lead to Israel's exodus. And the parallel to the darkness over the earth certainly can be found at Calvary, the death of Jesus. I think that's an interesting picture too. And I put the notes, wanted to bring that to your attention. Also, Amos 8 speaks, shall come to pass in that day, saith the Lord, that I will make the sun go down at noon, and I'll darken the earth in broad daylight. I will turn your feast into mourning, all your songs into lamentations. I'll bring sackcloth on every waist, baldness on every head, and I will make it like mourning for an only son, and its end like a bitter day. This is a judgment of God. And Moo says this kind of language actually points to the scene at Calvary. Verse 24, we're almost done. Verse 24, there's another temporary or incomplete compromise offered. Pharaoh called to Moses and said, go serve the Lord, only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you. So now he's going to let them all go except the animals. But Moses said, "You must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice the Lord our God. Our livestock also shall go with us, not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God. And even we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there." So this is just, and I just kind of put this in our, I guess, our terms. Pharaoh kind of says, go worship, but no sacrifices. Just, just kind of go out there and take your children, but don't take the sacrifices. And again, we are often encouraged by our enemy, the enemy of our soul, to not overdo it. If you want to serve God, okay, serve God, but don't overdo it. If you want to give, but don't overdo it. Um, if you want to be demonstrative, just keep it down. All those kinds of things. God is looking for full surrender from our lives, whatever that looks like for us. But the enemy is always wanting us to give less than what God is asking of us. That's the point. And their final words, the Lord hardened, verse 27, Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. And Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me. Take heed to yourself. And look at this, and see my face no more. For in the day you see my face, you shall die." So Moses said, "You have spoken well. I will never see your face again." Hamilton points out the irony of the seen, not seen face amidst the darkness. I mean, obviously, if this was still within that 3 days, there was some kind of light in the palace. But in the midst of the darkness, to say, "I'll not see your face again," there's something kind of underlining that as well. Let me give you some takeaways. I know that's a lot. That's just a lot of text, and nothing wrong with a lot of text. But let me give some takeaways. If God knew, here's some cool questions. If God knew the 9 plagues would be ineffective, why didn't he just cut to the chase from the beginning? I think some people ask that question. Motyer suggests that in this narrative, we see God's love of obedience, but we also see his revulsion from disobedience. I think that's important. God doesn't just love when we obey, God hates sin. And I think that is played out here, and the repetitive nature of it points out how God hates sin. God intends for his people to obey what he said, and Moses was trained in obedience, but Pharaoh became an example of the profound consequences of disobedience. Again, why did it take that long? Why didn't God just deal with it? I think sometimes we are unaware. I think our culture is unaware of the profound consequences of shaking our fist in the face of God and saying, we will do what we want to do. And I think we see that in this text. Disobedience led to the first human's ouster from Eden. Remember Adam and Eve? They could stay as long as they obeyed. And disobedience is what led to the flood. And now disobedience is what brings the plagues on Egypt. Motyer also notes that while the plagues began with death, they lead to freedom from death in the Exodus. He says we would often prefer the bliss of a kingdom of God without moral absolutes, presided over by a God without wrath, and entered through a Christ without a cross. But the price for this would be to discard not just this or that bit of the Bible, but the whole God given book. For in it, God has revealed his absolutes, that he is a God of intense, fiery holiness. Jesus died bearing our sins in his body on the cross, for that is what sin merits, and saving us from the wrath to come, for that is where sin leads. God gave Pharaoh many warnings before he institutes the death of the eldest son. That's what it's going to end with. We'll talk about that next week. But this is the character of God. He gives him many warnings before he loses his son. Some other lessons. The plagues show that God is greater than all other gods, that he is the only God, that he is all powerful. He is always and everywhere present. 8:22, sees that you may know that I am the Lord God and I'm in the midst of the land. Hardening of the heart issue, I've already talked about it. Humans are created to respond to God and to make choices. These form our character, and these choices shape our hearts. A long series of choices often occur before the final formation or a fixed habit develops. None of us know when that point of no return is reached. Can I just pause for a moment and say, in the context of the hardening of the heart, I don't know where that point is. I don't think, again, I do not think that God predestines some people for hell. I don't think so. God gives us all choices. I do think that choice after choice after choice after choice shapes our heart. And there is a point where that formation of the heart is made. And I think that's what we see in the life of Pharaoh. No one knows where that point of no return is reached. I've been in studies like this where we talked about the unpardonable sin, and people will say, well, I know somebody that did this and they've never, never come back. I don't know where that point is reached. And if they're still living, I'm not going to write them off. But the point is, God gives us the ability to make choices, and continually rejecting God does shape a person's heart. Pharaoh's hardened heart, it became hard, and then God hardened it, and he reached a point of no return. We are free moral agents, but the price we pay is that every choice contributes to our spiritual formation. And then the final point is the incomprehensible and irresistible power of God. He commands all resources for his glory. When he says lice, when he says flies, when he says frogs, God commands all resources. They cannot resist him or withstand him. And we are, as the writer of Hebrews says, all naked and laid bare before him. He is incomprehensible and irresistible. That was a lot. Thank you for enduring the lot.